Fraud is still not treated as if it were a real crime, even though these elite frauds cause greater financial losses than all other forms of property crime combined.
This is Bill Black, a former regulator. He says the reason more bankers aren't in jail is because fraud is not taken seriously.
What people need to understand is that in every country, the United States is actually the best in this in terms of resources, and we are horribly inadequate. Out of 1.5 million people employed in our criminal justice system, 2,300 actually do elite white-collar crime investigations, so a tiny, tiny handful.
But if fraud is so difficult to prove, isn't it a waste of resources to spend money on cases that can't be won? Well, Bill Black says they can.
Anytime you go up against elite white-collar criminals, they have the best criminal defense lawyers in the world. It is not easy to convict them, but it is also not impossible, and that's why we had a 90% conviction rate against the most elite frauds that were tried in U.S. history as a group.
Yes, you heard right. A 90% conviction rate. You see, Bill Black wasn't just any regulator. He became one of the most famous regulators in the world. He led the effort to expose congressional corruption during the savings and loan crisis in the 1980s. It was one of the largest financial scandals in America, and it made him a target.
Get Black, kill him dead, private detectives pursuing you, and the second most powerful elected official in the United States of America making it his mission to try to get you fired and referring to you constantly as the redheaded SOB and attacking you publicly in the press.
The crisis led to hundreds of savings and loans companies becoming insolvent and a multi-billion-dollar bailout from the federal government. But it also led to prosecutions.
We helped over 1,000 convictions, just the cases designated as major, and those cases were hyper-prioritized to go after the worst of the worst. We called it the top 100 list of the worst fraud schemes in the nation. It involved roughly 300 financial institutions and 600 individuals.
And how senior were those people?
All the way to chairman of board of directors, president, CEOs, and indeed a former governor of the state of Illinois.
So, if prosecutors could prove fraud then, why not now? Is it because the types of fraud carried out have got more complex?
Actually, the frauds have gotten far simpler. One was liar's loans. And these are loans in which you didn't verify the borrower's income. Well, there's nothing terribly subtle or complex about a liar's loan. So that's an easy fraud to prove. The second is appraisal fraud, to inflate the supposed market value of the collateral that's being pledged to safeguard the loan. If you're going to sell them to the secondary market, you can't say, hi, I'm selling you a fraudulent loan. So you have to make fraudulent representations and warranties. And that's the third great epidemic. And there's nothing subtle about any of those things.
The high-profile convictions didn't do Bill Black's career much good. He's now teaching at a small university in Missouri, 1,000 miles from Washington, D.C. He's not been asked to share his expertise with the Obama administration on how to prosecute fraudulent bankers. But if he were, he says he would advise them to reintroduce the criminal referral process, where regulators lay out why prosecutions can be brought.
In the savings and loan crisis, just our federal agency made over 30,000 criminal referrals to get that over 1,000 felony convictions in the current crisis, which is well over 100 times larger than the savings and loan crisis. The same federal agency, the Office of Thrift Supervision, made 0 criminal referrals. The Office of the Comptroller of the Currency, which is the U.S. agency that is supposed to regulate the largest national banks, made 0 criminal referrals. The Federal Reserve, which is supposed to regulate the largest bank holding companies, made 0 criminal referrals, and the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is smart enough to refuse to answer the question.
So the reason that fraudulent bankers in America aren't going to jail isn't just because prosecutors aren't pursuing those cases. It's because further back along the line, regulators aren't making criminal referrals in the first place. Bill Black says this is because fraud isn't taken seriously enough. If he's right, then we have to take this inquiry in a new direction. Finding out why fraud isn't seen as a priority takes us away from lawyers and regulators into the world of politics.
Part 3. The Revolving Door.
The other bill that I'm signing today gives prosecutors and regulators new tools to crack down on what's helped cause this crisis in the first place. And that's the
President Obama in 2009, 4 months in office and barely a grey hair in sight, announcing a new law designed to jail those who'd committed financial fraud.
So with that, I'm going to sign the Fraud Enforcement and Recovery Act along with these extraordinary legislators who helped to make it happen. Give them a big round of applause.
Basking in the applause, our next expert witness, Senator Ted Kaufman.
That moment, I felt absolutely great because I had done everything I could. I'd used everything I'd learned in 40 years hanging in the Senate, all my education, in order to help get something like this passed.
And when the act was signed, you said, "Today marks a turning point. Our prosecutors will soon have the resources they need to find, prosecute and jail those who've committed financial fraud, those who illegally lined their pockets and left millions of Americans with the devastating consequences will pay the price." If someone had said to you 5 years ago when you made that speech that no senior bankers in Wall Street would be in jail now, what would you have said to them?
I'm incredibly disappointed. Here's what happened. While everyone in the Justice Department was testifying before me in the hearings in judiciary and saying publicly that their top priority was going after fraud enforcement, here's what the Inspector General for the Department of Justice reported during that period. The Department of Justice ranked criminal complex financial crimes as the lowest of the 6 ranked criminal threats within the area of responsibility and ranked mortgage fraud as the lowest subcategory threat within the complex financial crimes category. So essentially, it was government policy of the Department of Justice, as reported by the Inspector General, that while leaders in the department were saying that this was a high priority, it was not just not their highest priority, it was their lowest priority.
It was a shock for the senator, who thought that the new law he'd helped draft would herald a new era of accountability. And the secrecy surrounding the way in which prosecutors make decisions about which cases to pursue means it's not easy to challenge them.
One of the most sensitive areas of government in the United States is what we call prosecutorial discretion. If you're in the government and you have to make a decision on whether to prosecute someone or how to prosecute them, each individual prosecutor makes those decisions alone. The Congress has no oversight over prosecutorial discretion. So if you're a prosecutor, no one ever knows, in many cases, why you did or didn't prosecute. Why they didn't prosecute anybody at the banks when the banks have paid over $150 billion in fines and no one's been prosecuted.
So he can't be sure why prosecutors aren't pursuing fraudulent bankers. But he does have a theory.
They had a gigantic conflict of interest. Many of the lawyers in the Department of Justice and in the Securities Exchange Commission had come from Wall Street and were going to go back to Wall Street after they left. So the real gigantic conflict of interest was decisions they made while they were in the Justice Department, the Securities Exchange Commission, with one eye on the fact that they were going to have to get a job afterwards back in the law firms that they were dealing with. There's a disturbing number of people in those positions who have gone back to work on Wall Street on the very firms they're negotiating with.
Although he's no longer a senator, Ted Kaufman hasn't given up on the issue of prosecuting fraudulent bankers. It's often the subject of his weekly newspaper column. He argues that without prosecutions, the culture that led to the financial crisis won't change.
Prosecution is so important, not for revenge. Prosecution is important as a deterrent. The idea that no one went to jail for this means that people are in place all over the financial community who engaged in fraud and got away free. So if you're sitting in a meeting today and someone says, here, we got a special deal we can run, because they're back doing the same kind of risky things they were doing before. I got a deal we can run today. It's not going to be quite in the up and up. And one person says, well, wait a minute, we can go to jail for that. And they all laugh because nobody went to jail. I mean, nobody. I'm not saying everybody should go to jail. I'm not saying a whole lot of people to jail. but nobody went to jail?